Good morning, divas and dudes. It is awesome to have you all here today. My name is Raquel de Oils, for those of you who were here last week with me. And this class is called If You Are What You Eat, What's Eating You. For those of you who are new today, welcome. We're happy to have you here joining us today. We have a lot of really good stuff on tap for today. We have a delicious recipe, which is going to take a little bit of time because the name of the game for today is slowing down and relaxing and enjoying everything, pleasure. That's all what we're going to talk about today. I did give you all a little bit of a homework assignment, so I see a few of you kind of ruffling your pages there. I'm anxious to hear, for those of you who were able to take some notes, what you came up with, and we'll share that when we get to a point in our cooking where we need to kind of let things simmer. We're going to let that simmer, and then we're going to simmer for a bit, and it's going to be great. Okay, so for today, we have a slightly different topic. So last week, we were talking all about like our nervous system, sort of the biology of what happens to our body, and specifically what happens to our body when we get stressed out, right? So we talked about stressed state eating, and sort of how that affects our digestion, our biology, and also our relationship and patterns that we develop when it comes to food. So today we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about, you all have some handouts there, we'll go through those in a little bit, but we're going to talk about more of kind of something that's called a Cephalic Phase Digestive Response. And it sounds like a giant, complicated word, and I assure you it is one of the simplest, most naturalist things that actually we already do. You may not be aware, and that's kind of also it. We want to make you more aware. So we're going to tap into that a little bit, but we're going to start out with this recipe, which is a delicious Chana Masala. So has anybody enjoyed Chana Masala before, restaurant, or made it? Okay, so it's basically Indian cuisine, lots of beautiful spices, flavors, so spices, also a little bit of heat from things like peppers. This recipe I love for many reasons. So I love it because it's delicious. It smells great. It's something that you can prepare in advance. It keeps really well, so if you're into things like meal planning, this is a good one to do. It's a plant-based recipe again, so there's no dairy. It's got a good source of protein, which is the chickpeas that we'll be using today. It's a great recipe for those of you who maybe are kind of exploring different cuisines and want to try something different. This is an easy go-to. There's several ingredients in it, which I'll walk you through here. So obviously the star of the show are our beautiful garbanzos or chickpeas. Great source of protein, great source of fiber. We have a yellow onion. I'm a fan of these sweet yellow onions, and when you can find them, please use them because they really do have that natural sweetness, and they're so good in so many different things. We also have some garlic. H-E-B has some delicious, beautiful garlic with this nice purple. I always like to, when you see these, buy them. They have these beautiful purple stripes on them. The skin is a little bit thicker, but the actual clove is just so fragrant and a little bit sweet as well. So we're going to be using some of that. We also have ginger, fresh ginger, which, as many of you probably know, is great for inflammation. So this ginger is super fresh. It's like you can almost peel the skin off of it. We're going to use a peeler in a minute to get some of that off. And then a couple other things we're going to use are some fresh lemon juice, cilantro, which I believe we used in our last recipe. Did anybody try the papaya ceviche at home? Awesome. Okay. Yes. Oh, great. Welcome, you all. Okay. And then the jalapeno, obviously. And then we're going to use some really beautiful spices. So today I have a couple different combinations here. One is garam masala. So has anybody cooked with this before? A couple of you. Okay. So garam masala is an Indian spice blend, similar to curry, but more warming spices. So you might find different variations depending on where you purchase it. But it basically has things like cinnamon, cardamom. You might find a little bit of coriander in there. It's a beautiful spice, and in a minute I'll have this passed around so you all can smell this. Because again, part of what we're doing today is slowing down, really taking in the time. This is a recipe that likes to simmer. So you can be doing other things. It's a great one to do, like maybe if you've got some free time on a Sunday or some weekday evening. Just kind of let it take its time. The more that this simmers and blends, the more the flavors come together, and it's just delicious. So garam masala. We also have some coriander that we're going to be using. We'll have some ground turmeric, which again is another root like ginger that's great for inflammation. And then we have black mustard seeds. Now these are a little rare, and I will tell you a few things if you all have not used these before. They are like little BBs. They are mustard seeds. They come from a plant. They're rare in the fact that there's different kinds of mustard seeds. You might see yellow ones, which are typically used in actual mustards, right, or ground into powder. There's sort of a lighter brown one, and then these black ones. And the black ones are rare because they are the only ones that have to be harvested by hand. So when you can find them, they're a little pricey. However, Central Market is fantastic because they do carry them in the bulk section. So this little packet I paid about 67 cents for. I had about half this packet full. Yes. So yeah, I highly recommend if you are able to get to Central Market, or any Sprouts maybe might have them, some of those stores like that have bulk sections. That's a great way to, especially when you're trying a new ingredient or a spice, to be able to just try a little bit. So there's that, and then a couple other things. So that's kind of part of our spices. We also have cumin seeds that we're going to be using. So cumin is a very common spice, ground cumin, but we also have cumin seeds. And then I think that is it for our spices. So what I'm going to have you do, I'll pass those around in a minute. A couple other quick ingredients here. Whole tomatoes and coconut oil. So coconut oil is great for cooking. I like to use it, especially in dishes like this. This is refined coconut oil, which means you might get a little bit more of that coconut flavor. Also, it has a high smoke point, which means that essentially when it comes to a higher temperature, when you're cooking with it, it won't smoke and start to burn, which is not what we want when we're cooking, right? If that ever happens to you, I would say start over. Don't try to continue cooking with any oil that burns and starts to get smoky, because that's not good for us, not good for our health, not good for the recipe. So coconut oil, and then whole tomatoes. We're going to do something fun. Well, I'm going to do something fun with this. I was kind of thinking about bringing somebody up to help me, but we're going to, for the sake of time and because we're shooting this for the folks at home watching us, if you'd like to do this part at home, I highly encourage you to do that. Okay, so I'm going to move us on with our recipe, but the first thing we need to do is we're going to take a little bit of the coconut oil and add it to our pan, and we're going to basically just kind of toast the seeds that I have here. So I have my cumin seeds and my mustard seeds. And the thing about putting the mustard seeds in warm oil is it helps them to pop and open up and release more of their flavor. So they have kind of like this nutty, sometimes people describe it as almost like a radishy, kind of spicy flavor. So we're going to help it along by adding some heat to it. So let me just get my pan going here. And I'm going to add my coconut oil to the pan. Coconut oil is also great for the skin. Has anybody ever used just coconut oil? Yeah. Yes. I had a friend that I used to work with, and she was a pastry chef and was always using different things, but she, constantly washing her hands, she would always use the coconut oil to keep her hands nice and moisturized. Okay, so we're going to do that. And once that starts to melt and shimmer just a little, then we'll add our cumin seeds and our mustard seeds. In the meantime, what I'd like to do is also, let's start with, we need to make a little paste. And for part of our paste, what we're going to do is add this ginger, 2 cloves, actually it's 4 cloves of garlic, but these are pretty big, so I'm going to count them as 2 because they're quite large. So we're going to take these 2 cloves of garlic, the ginger, and our jalapeno, and that along with about a tablespoon of lemon juice, and then I have, right here, kosher salt. Anybody cook with kosher salt? Mm-hmm. Yes. So kosher salt is great because it has kind of larger, more drier flakes than regular table salt. It doesn't have any additives or iodine in it, but I find that when you're cooking with it, it just has more of a salt taste. So it's not super salty like table salt. So a little goes a long way, and you can really control the flavor of what you're cooking. So I tend to use that when I'm doing anything savory. Okay, so I want to make sure that I have this melting. Yep. Okay, see the light? Great. Okay, so while that is melting, before I get my seeds in, I want to work on this paste. And so I'm going to use this mortar and pestle. And so this is a recipe. I'm going to try to do a combination of moving us along so we have time to get through everything, but also I want us to enjoy everything. So what I also brought with me, while I'm cooking this, I'm going to have you all smell everything. So cephalic phase digestion is essentially the first stage of our digestive process, which has nothing to do with any of the food that we're about. Well, it has nothing to do with us having food like we're eating it. It's even before we get to that point. So if you think about everything, the sense, the tastes, visual appearance of something, how things are pleasing you to the eye, how things are pleasing to the eye or pleasing you sort of with smells and all of that, that is cephalic phase digestion. So while I'm cutting this, what I'm going to do is maybe I'll start with the spices on this side and have you guys just kind of take a look at the textures. Feel free to open the bags and smell the different spices. And then on this side, I have, maybe I'll do this so it's a little easier this way. I have some of our fresh ingredients that I'll be chopping, and they're in little containers that you can open. Oh, we got a little bit of static fun going on here. That's cool. Thank you. So I have some cilantro, fresh cilantro, some ginger, which I'll be chopping, the garlic. And if you all want to kind of pass that around and just get a little smell of that. So, yes, exactly. First thing, garlic in the morning. Last time I had some of you taste the papaya seeds. Some of you were brave enough to do that. Okay. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to just kind of help us along with this paste by just thinly slicing this garlic really quick. And then I'll put it in our mortar and pestle to just pound it into a nice little paste that will get added to this masala a little later on. And my oil is still melting here. Okay, just kind of run my knife through this really quick here. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the ginger. And for the ginger, we just need about a 1-inch knob. But just so that I don't have things, my mortar is a little small, so I don't want to. You could also do this in a food processor if you have one. That'll help this come along a little faster, but the name of the game again is slowing down. How many of you like to cook at home now with a little music or, maybe your favorite podcast?
A glass of wine.
A glass of wine, absolutely, yes.
Good glasses of wine.
Yes, actually, I will. I'm not a big drinker anymore, but I do enjoy a good glass of wine. And last night I had a little leftover champagne from Mother's Day. So my mother and I shared with some fresh squeezed orange juice, a little bit of a mimosa in the evening, which is a nice way to end the week. Okay, so what I did was, this is a nice good little knob of ginger, and it's got this really beautiful thin peel, which tells me that this ginger is really fresh. Because you can see it's just like peeling off, like some of those trees, right? That just kind of have that peel that comes off. And the smell of fresh ginger is one of my favorites. So there is some ginger passing around if you all would like to smell that and enjoy that this morning. But I'm just going to take this peeler and very carefully, because it's a very sharp peeler, just take some of that skin off. Now, there are some people who like to cook with that. That's fine. It's good fiber, right? It's a little stringy, so to each their own. Okay. And again, I think I reminded you all about safe cutting, right, last time. So making a flat surface with something, that's what I did with this knob of ginger. And I'm just keeping an eye on my oil because it looks like it is ready. I'm just going to make some little flat planks of this and line them up and slice those. But my oil is nice and warm, so I'm going to add all of this is where the magic is going to begin. I've got my black mustard seeds in there and our cumin seeds. I'm just going to go ahead and make some little cuts into these planks of ginger just so I can break it down a little bit more. And if you have, like in the container that's going around with the ginger, just the peel, that's great for putting in your teas. If any of you like just sometimes some really simple sipping broths, you could add the peel to that. or if you make little vegetable broth kind of from scraps, that's kind of a thing of mine. I had a friend who was kind of teasing me about, you never waste anything. And I'm like, well, that's also, we really don't want to waste anything. So if you can use it in another application, may as well, right? I found myself obviously doing that much more during the pandemic because we just weren't sure when we were going to be able to get things. So it just kind of continued after that much more so. But sometimes I'll keep like a freezer bag just full of scraps, and then at the end of the week or after a couple weeks, just put that in a pot with some water and simmer, and then I've got some kind of broth or stock to use. So as you can hear, we've got a little bit of popping, not quite a lot yet. We'll get there. And I don't know if you can smell just yet. Maybe those of you who are closer, you can start to smell the cumin seeds. I can smell them. That's one of my favorite smells. Okay. Did you all get to enjoy all the different scents? Okay. Last thing I'm going to do is this jalapeno. And I'm going to cut the top and the bottom off. And just cut it right down the middle. And we're going to use the whole thing. Now, I did adapt this recipe from the original because it called for 6 Thai chilies, which according to a little bit of research I did, Thai chilies definitely have a much higher heat index than a jalapeno, like a lot higher. And to put 6 chilies in this recipe would, for me, I know some people's palates are a little bit bolder, stronger, would have caused me to not taste anything. I think there's a fine balance between adding a lot of heat just to get some dimension to the cuisine that you're making, but then sometimes I think it tends to overpower the rest of the dish. And so we're just going to be using 1 jalapeno, which, as you saw, I'm taking the seeds out of, and I'm just going to cut it into strips and again break it down so that I can mash it into this paste that I'm going to make. This is smelling fantastic, by the way, so we're on the right track. And so I'm going to put that all in this nice little mortar and pestle. And to that, I'm adding, first I'm going to mash it a little bit with the kosher salt. So the kosher salt is, yes, for seasoning, but also to give us a little bit of just some abrasion, right? There's definitely some of that with the mortar and pestle, but we want to make sure we have some of that with the seasoning. So we add a little bit of salt. And then the last thing I'm going to add to this, once I break this down a little bit, is some lemon juice. Does anybody have an idea of why I might want to add lemon juice to this? It's kind of similar to what we were talking about last week with the red onions and the salt. So when we were talking about the red onions and the salt, when we made the pickled onions, we said the salt was there for 2 reasons. One was to season it, and one was to kind of take lessen the bite of the red onion. So that's also what we're doing here, but with the garlic. So there's a really famous, I believe he's Israeli chef, and he makes beautiful food, and he has a recipe for hummus that calls for just kind of taming the bite of garlic with a little bit of citrus, and so he uses lemon to do that. And we have a lot of ginger, garlic, and all of these kind of hot, delicious ingredients, but we want to tame that a little bit, and especially the garlic with some lemon. So.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
You put salt in. How much salt did you put in there?
Oh, I'm sorry. It was just half a teaspoon.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That looked like a whole lot more.
Nope,
So
just half a
okay,
teaspoon.
that's the reason I was asking, because I
Yep.
saw it was half a teaspoon,
Yep.
but it looked like more.
Yep, just half a teaspoon.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's, again, why I like kosher salt, because a little goes a long way. In this recipe, in total, that's actually the only amount of salt for the full recipe. I tend to add a little bit more at the end, just because I want to sort of draw out a lot of the flavors now that they've had a chance to kind of meld together. And I'm going to keep mashing this here, but I'm now starting to hear my mustard seeds pop. We need a overhead camera to see that, but I don't know if those closest to the pot can hear that. And we're just going to go a little bit more on this now that I've gotten to the bottom. And these smells are just amazing. So you've got, again, that fresh garlic, the beautiful scent of the ginger, fresh ginger. And, okay, so I'm going to add, let's see here. Oh, I have my lemon juice over here. Okay, so just a little bit of that lemon juice. And yeah, easily this can be done in a food processor, or you could just continue to mince it with a knife if you didn't have either of those. I actually happen to have my grandmother's old molcajete, yes, but however, funny story, my brother wanted it and we couldn't find the bowl part, so he just took the pestle. And so he has that and I have the bowl. So, yeah. I mean, it's definitely, you can tell it's been loved and it's been used because it is very thin at the center. So I don't use it. It's on display now. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside and just clean up my cutting board here so I can walk us on to the next thing, which is our onion. Because this is now, as you can smell it, smelling delicious. And what we want to do is we want to have enough time to caramelize this onion that I'm about to chop. And a quick tip, and what I'm going to have in this recipe for you all to try, if you make this recipe at home, is that we're going to add baking soda to it. Now, someone might say, well, why in the heck are you adding baking soda to an onion? Well, I have learned that caramelized onions are delicious, right? But they take forever. And talk about like really slowing down and enjoying your food. So what we're going to do is take the baking soda, and that will affect the pH of the onion and help it break down faster. So sometimes people say, oh, add some sugar. Well, that's going to add some sweetness, though, to it. And if you don't want that, we're using a sweet onion, so that'll naturally kind of come out from the onion. But baking soda, and all we're using is a 1/4 teaspoon of that today, will help this brown much more quickly. And you're going to see it. I'm going to show you. Right now you can see that this onion has just a beautiful yellow color, right? In a few minutes of just sitting with that baking soda, it's going to have this beautiful brown color. And the longer you let it go, it will turn it'll look like it's burning, but it's not. It'll have just almost the same color as this cutting board that I have here. So I just cut off a little bit of the root, but it's still intact. And so last time I showed you how to do cuts, just simple cuts to make those pickled onions. Today with this onion, I'm going to dice it. And a quick way to do that is to cut it in half, like so. And then now that I've got these flat surfaces, two things you could do. Two things you can do is you can just cut them one way, cut them another way, and you'll have some nice big dices. I do it a little differently. I kind of go in from the side and then I go around the top. So I'll show you that here. And I'm always keeping my fingers right at the top. I don't want them too close to my blade. I'm not cutting it all the way through, but now I've made my cuts one way, and this is a quick way that I can get a dice out of my onion. And now it's a little bit tricky for me to maneuver, so I'm going to place it flat down, and it's already still cut. And so now I've got my pieces like that. Go around the core. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing with the other half of the onion. Helps to have a sharp knife. Okay, so I'm just going to run my knife through just in case I missed a few pieces here. And we're going to get that into the pot. Here we go. Now we're cooking. Who doesn't love the smell of onion, right? Delicious. Okay, so I'm going to just give that a little stir, and then here's our baking soda, that 1/4 teaspoon. I'm going to add that right in. And we're going to let that sit for about a good 3 to 4 minutes. This is going to take some time to develop, but really, it looks like there's a lot of ingredients. Half of it is all the spices that you're using. And I really intentionally chose this recipe because I want you all to think about a recipe where you can slow down and really enjoy the process of it. I'm definitely kind of trying to move us along for the sake of time, but this is a really fun one to do where you have some time, because there's not much to it. It's just kind of mixing things together, but sort of this cool, fun, sciencey thing of sort of watching these onions caramelize. So right now they've got kind of this yellow, greenish tinge, but just give it a few minutes. I'm going to turn it up just a tad, and we're going to just listen to this sizzle away. When I'm cooking and when I'm teaching people how to cook, I often say you can follow a recipe. That's a great place to start. But the other thing is listening to everything else, right? I don't know why that keeps doing that. That's so funny. So something such as when you're first starting to cook, you have to pay attention to all the cues. So we heard the seeds sputtering, we heard the grease or the coconut oil in the pan simmering. All of those are cues to help us. If you hear it too hot, then maybe your temperature's too hot and you have to lower it down, right? So cooking is all about using all of our senses, which again is a great way to reiterate our lesson for today. Okay, so one other thing I'm going to do, we've got our paste here. That's going to take a few minutes. The last thing I want to show you all is our tomatoes. And so you could use diced tomatoes for this next component, or you can do what I'm about to do, which is these are whole tomatoes, right? So they've been peeled already. There's a little bit of juice in there. It almost looks like tomato sauce. This is going to add some great acidity, but also some nice liquid to, it's essentially a stew, right? It's a chickpea stew. But I'm going to take these in my hand and very neatly, without spraying myself, just use my hands, my fingers to break these apart. So I said you could use diced tomatoes if you wanted to, but this is much more fun, right? Where's the fun in it if you can't do this? So this is one where maybe if you're cooking with your family, have the kids do this, or you get in there and do that. Like listen to all the sounds, the sensation of just kind of squeezing this through my fingers is a lot of fun. Maybe you've had a really rough day. You come home and you're like, I just got to get this out today, and this cooking this recipe is going to be that gateway to just help me sort of simmer down and relax for the end of the day. So there we have it. And I've just kind of just mashed these a little bit. You could also take a potato masher and do the same thing. But you want to leave some chunks, so see like this, because again, we want to build the flavors here, but we also want to build in the textures. Okay, so we've got a few minutes here to go. I'm going to switch my gloves off. Okay, now while that's coming together, this is our time to have a little chat. So I would like to hear from those of you who did the exercise last week on tracking our stress. If anybody feels comfortable sharing, and I hope that you do, what were some of the things that you noticed? Any particular things that were a challenge for you? Because we were tracking, obviously, things that might be stress triggers. And when we were talking about that, we said, it could be things like work, family, anything that's kind of coming up in your life. Maybe it was a specific circumstance. And I shared with a few of you that earlier in the week, someone hit my car. And I was just, it's kind of been lingering with me. So what I found was that day I hadn't prepared lunch. And so when I got home, I was just kind of eating a little bit of everything because I was trying to kind of fill up to feel better, right? And so those are kind of the things that I'm hoping you all had an opportunity to take a look at and see. So does anybody feel comfortable sharing anything that you tracked from last week?
I'll share.
Okay.
My parents are 95 and 92.
Okay.
My dad can be quite demanding. So when he calls me and says he needs something, I find myself rushing over there, stressed out, and then driving through Chick-fil-A. Because I had all my time preparing supper. That's been a trigger for me, and and I'm there to help them, but it's a station in my life that I'm having to deal with, and I'm fine with it, but it causes stress.
It does, for sure.
So, senior parents.
Yes, and I am in a similar situation. I take care of my 88-year-old mother and her little dog, who's awesome, but he requires some assistance too, and yeah, it's definitely, if that's kind of a natural routine of yours where you're assisting someone else, that does take a lot of energy from you and can be very stressful. And it is then even more critical to find ways to take care of ourselves. It is that someone reminded me of that very thing this week by saying, we can't take care of others until we take care of ourselves first and make sure that we're getting what we need. Chick-fil-A, I would say, I never want to shame anybody about the choices that they make about, the food, because as long as you're getting some kind of nourishment, especially, maybe your whole day you didn't have a chance to sit down and eat a meal, but you got something, you took the moment, it was quick, but it was nourishing, and at that moment it was something that you needed because you would not have had the energy to make it through the day without. So there are just other things that I think, as you kind of look at some of these patterns that happen, one of the big things that I tell people is sort of if you can anticipate maybe having like some snacks on you, maybe having something at home that's a quick go-to. I was talking earlier to someone who came, I have these little cans of chickpeas that are something that is my go-to. So if I don't have time to cook in advance, I can take that, put it in the microwave, and put that over some rice if I have some already made rice. But things like that, so that when we get into these stress situations, we can find quick, easy things to help us along. Okay, anybody else want to share?
Yeah, so this is the first time my whole life, I got this crash alert on my phone, and it was from my son. So this crash alert, I've never heard this. It was a different sound. My phone was on silent because I do group therapy. And I looked at it and it was in red. And I thought, oh my God, my son was in an accident. It's a crash alert that goes with, it's a signal app that I have with my car insurance, farmer's car insurance. So I immediately got up, said this is an emergency, heart's racing, flight, fight, let's go. And so some of the staff there were looking at it, and it tells you the location. It told me the location. I called 911. They said, no, we haven't heard any accident there. Anyway, I left. And so I did a lot of deep breathing because your adrenaline's flowing. You don't know what you're going to find, right? So, got there, no accident. What happened here? Then I was like angry because I was like, what's this, a false alert? So I called the farmer's insurance, talked to my agent and said, what happened here? He said, maybe he braked on the brake fast to prevent an accident, and it triggered the phone saying it was an accident. And then my son wasn't answering. Nobody's answering. That feeling?
Just adds
no
to
one's
it, yes.
answering. Your mind is going,
Yes.
Yeah. So, the farmer's insurance guy said, look, there's no accident. You call 911. He took it a logical way. There's no accident. He called the police. There's no ambulance there. Your son's not answering, but you know what? I think that's what happened. So I go back to the group, and there's some people in the group that are Mexican American, and they said to me, when you get scared like this, you need to have a piece of candy or something with sugar.
My mom.
I was like, what? Oh my. So somebody handed me a peanut butter cup. Peanut butter cup. So it was a miniature, right? And I thought, oh, what the heck? I'll try it. And so and they said, and if you panic and you have anxiety, you have to have something with sour candy. I was like, wow, this is great. They're teaching me this great stuff, right? Anyway, I go, what's the reason behind the candy? I don't know. Something about blood sugar high. And the panic one, the sour one, is about diverting your mind from the panic to the sour that you taste in your mouth. Okay, so then I found out later what happened. You're not going to believe this. He put his iPhone and wallet on top of his dad's car, thought his dad wasn't going to be leaving. His dad is going to a funeral mass. He comes back, my son comes back and sees the car is gone with the iPhone on top of the car and the wallet. He immediately goes that direction, finds the iPhone in the middle of the road, untouched. Wow.
Oh, wow, that's lucky.
So that's what happened. The iPhone fell off, alerted that it was a crash. The wallet. Right. And did he find the wallet? No. Now that was the next stress because we started to look. He walked 3 miles. He walked and looked for the wallet, but everything was in that wallet. But thank God that was its replacement. It was in the wallet. But he even had a tile in the wallet to signal where the wallet was. Well, what goes that tile if it gets squashed, smashed? It's not any good. But how he found the phone was through Apple and his laptop. That's what he did. He took his laptop with him, and he found the phone untouched.
That's great.
What about his wallet?
I'm sorry? Not yet.
Not yet.
So anyway, what did I don't know. I went to the lentils and like Raquel, like you were saying, I like these Amy soups, but I like the low sodium. There's the vegetable, there's the one for lentils, and I do low sodium. So I just pull that out. It's a go-to, it's fast, some rice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was
So
very
you
bad.
had
It was very
your
stressful.
go-to, but that is an extremely stressful situation. All the unknowns along the way, and still right now kind of some unknowns. But
Yeah.
that was kind of your go-to. So you had that, okay?
And the candy.
And the candy, which I do have to say, my mother is the same. I don't know if it's a Mexican
It
wives'
is
tale, because she will religiously say, I was not feeling well, I panicked, and so I had a teaspoon of sugar and just drank some water. Like, I was like, I don't know what that's
I
about.
don't know the science behind that, but the support of the group
The group,
is absolutely
yes.
phenomenal.
And actually, I believe we'll be talking about that in a little bit here. But I wanted to take a pause, thank you all for sharing, to show you the color of these onions. So see now how they've changed color? I mean, some of that is obviously from the mustard seeds too, but they are completely dark. And if we were to continue to let this go for like another 8 minutes or so, they'll continue to get even darker. But for the sake of time, what we're gonna do is we're gonna add in all of this beautiful paste that we made earlier. And then all these delicious spices, that blend of the turmeric, the coriander, the garam masala. And we're just gonna let that kind of, so aromatic. I mean, if you all can smell that. We're gonna add that, and it's about 1 teaspoon and a half of garam masala in here, half a teaspoon of turmeric, and half a teaspoon of black pepper, and then I believe it's a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of coriander. And one thing I wanted to share with you all about black pepper and turmeric, there is better absorption of turmeric if you add black pepper. So you might start to see this. I noticed this several years ago, and now anytime I see a recipe with turmeric, chances are there's also black pepper in it. So if you're ever cooking with turmeric, be sure to add black pepper, because apparently it helps with absorption. I even read up to like 2,000% more absorption, quicker absorption into the body, just by combining those 2 spices. Okay. What we're also going to add to this next is our tomato. Beautiful tomatoes. Half a cup of water. And then also our delicious chickpeas. I'm reserving half a teaspoon of the garam masala just to add at the end. And I do that just to give it a little extra flavor boost. All of this stuff is going to simmer, so we want to make sure that we have plenty of flavor. And then what I want to do now is add about half of this fresh cilantro. And I'm just going to do kind of a rough chop here. When cilantro has these nice fine stems, I'll use some of that. But again, you could save that and make like a nice little sipping broth with some of those ginger peels, maybe a little bit of garlic, some nice sliced carrots for some sweetness. We're going to add that all in. And then I'm just going to cover this. So see, not a lot of complication with this recipe. It really is pretty simple. But I want this to come together. So I'm going to just simmer that with the lid just slightly ajar. And hopefully that'll come up to a simmer in a bit. And we're just going to let that hang out. We do have some prepared that does not have the jalapeno. So for those of you who want to try this, we do have some ready for you today without the jalapeno. But let me just get cleaned up here a little bit, and then I want to talk a little bit more. Is there anybody else who wants to share anything that they tracked? Well, I would encourage you all to continue to think about sort of the patterns that you see in what might come up for you just kind of on a regular basis, because these things will happen to us regardless, right? I think that's part of what stresses me, is that I think that, oh no, it's clear sailing and it's going to be like this, and then bam, something happens and you're like, dang it. So I'm just going to let that hang out here. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what you have in front of you here. So we were talking about the cephalic phase digestive response. So big phrase, but essentially it's the first stage of digestion that involves taste, pleasure, aroma, satisfaction, and visual stimulation. So if you think about when you go out to maybe a restaurant and you walk in, all of the sights, sounds, everything that's happening, even before you sit down at the table, right? That's all part of this. We're not even sitting down to eat the meal yet. But there's a couple of things. So cephalic obviously refers to the cerebral or the brain. So obviously when our brain is feeling like it's kind of firing on all cylinders, we're open and experiencing all of these different senses, right? So it's a way for us to interpret our food experience. And it's really critical because I think a lot of times when we go and we enjoy a meal or we just eat something, we're not really paying that much attention to it. And this is really kind of the key to understanding how to work with our relationship with food. The whole premise of this class is to really understand, our dynamics when it comes to our relationships with food. Why are we choosing certain things? What's happening kind of in the background that's causing us to choose this over that? But when you take a look at something like this cephalic phase digestive response, it really is kind of something that's happening naturally, right? So it sounds fancy, but it's really something that we're all probably exposed to on a regular basis when we're cooking food, enjoying food. But one thing is we'll start with visual, right? So you walk into the restaurant, you sit down, and maybe you've passed a counter and they've got beautiful, like a display of a cheese board or a bowl of fruit or something, and you're seeing all these beautiful things with the food. Maybe the decor, the environment, right? Like what's happening around the area. So if you see things that are like a variety of colors, that's going to obviously be more pleasing to the eye and maybe pique your interest to choose something over something else. What happens, do you think, when you see something or somebody presents you with a plate of food and it's got kind of like all these one-dimensional colors? Is that something that you might tend to reach for? Or, I don't know, maybe that is, you're like, okay, everything's kind of the same shade of burnt green or brown or yellow. Do you think that would be appetizing or appealing versus something that's very colorful, like this plate that has all these beautiful fresh colors? Okay, so think about that, the visual of when we experience food. The other thing is scents. You all walked into this room today and you're like, oh, it smells great. I taught a class recently and same thing happened. I was chopping some fresh herbs and everybody kept coming in saying, God, that smells great in here. And it was a small space, so obviously the scent took up the space and everybody was just like blown away by that. So obviously scents can trigger us and in a good way. If you smell something that's kind of off, that might also affect your experience with the food. Or sometimes I was sharing the story about when I went to Paris and I bought this beautiful cheese, but it was so much that I had to leave it in the room, and then I went out and did some sightseeing with the person I was traveling with, and when we came back, the whole room smelled of stinky cheese. But it was, I tell you, some of the best cheese ever, despite the smell. And then the other thing is texture. Right, so in here in our dish today, we're having all sorts of textures. We've got, once this comes together, it'll stew, it'll get thicker. We've got kind of the nice sort of bite of these delicate chickpeas or garbanzos. We have some of that crushed tomato in there now. It'll get a little thicker, so we'll have that texture. A lot of times when people are experiencing foods and new foods, the texture is what throws them off, right? So I tend to work with a lot of youth, and I know a lot of times kids will say, I don't like it because it's slimy or it's, too sticky or something. Are there any textures that you all experience and you're like, no, it's not for me? Anything
Greek yogurt.
Greek yogurt.
And avocados.
And avocados. So those tend to be creamier, right? And you just,
It sticks to you.
and it sticks to your mouth. And then for that, you're just like, no, I'm not going to have it. Okay? And
Okra, I can't stand it.
Okra.
I can't stand it. Slimy, rough,
yes.
sandy.
Yes.
I need crunch. I need crunch
Yes.
in everything I eat.
Okra, if you cook it with heat, and don't cook it too long, then the sliminess is not as bad. It's the same with like cactus petals, right? Nopales. So you can either quickly cook those so that they don't get as slimy. Because the slime factor kind of throws me off a little bit, but I enjoy them. This application of this chana masala, I do a similar dish with okra, and it's so delicious, and you don't get the slime factor. So maybe we'll do that sometime. Crunchy. I heard somebody say
I have
crunchy.
to have two things. I have to have crunch in my food.
Yes.
I think it's a nuance that I
No, but I agree. I am not a big fan of just a regular plain green salad, but if I build it with all these components, and texture for me is big to enjoy a salad, and crunch has to be part of it. So I'll always add in some kind of like pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds or something to have that in there, to have that bite. So this is great. I mean, these are all the things that we want to think about, because sometimes if we're hesitant to try something different, or we're just not sure like where to go next with what we're cooking for ourselves or our families, think about the things that right off the bat you enjoy, or that you're just like, not for me, and then find things that suit what you're looking for. That's a thing. And then how do we feel about the foods that we enjoy? Is it a pleasurable experience, or you eat something and you're like, that was just like meh or so-so? Obviously you go out and you dine, and sometimes it's hit or miss, right? And you're like, that was okay. But you go somewhere else and you're just like blown away, and you're like, I'm coming back here again, or I'm gonna, maybe somebody invites you to a barbecue or a dinner, and you're like, that was such a great meal. I want to get the recipe and I'm gonna cook that because it was so delicious. Like, you're experiencing all of those different things, and that was just a great experience. And then again, to go back to the restaurant scenario, maybe you walk in and there's music playing, like you all, that's intentionally, I did that today. But the setting that you're walking into, is that an enjoyable one? Maybe you're at a park or having a picnic and you're out in nature, and that influences your experience of that food dish. I met somebody recently, he's an adult, but he said, I hate oatmeal because when I was a kid, I just had a bad experience with it, and I was forced to eat really mushy oatmeal. He's like, but I will eat oatmeal now if it's like an overnight oats, because it has more texture. And for him, he found a way to enjoy oatmeal that worked for him. So I often think about experience. Environment is a huge thing. I was joking with a friend of mine recently, and I said, I cannot remember dates for the life of me, but if you tell me what we were eating at a certain time that something happened, I will say, oh yeah, that's when we ate this thing, and that's how I remember things, because obviously food and memory are connected. But it's much more pleasurable that way too, because I'm remembering not just the food that I ate, maybe I'm remembering the people I was with and how it made me feel. And I think a lot of times we forget about that, right? Because we're in a rush to kind of just move things along. I just got to eat something. I got to go do the next thing in my day, which takes us to the back side of our handout here. This is coming together. I'm just going to give it a little stir here. This looks great. It's still a little watery, but yes, it smells delicious. We're going to let that simmer some more. Okay, so what I want to talk about next is something called eating speed. Now, this has nothing to do with chewing your food 100 times before you swallow it, although some people do that. That's good for digestion, obviously, but this is more about, again, taking time to understand how we are interacting with our foods, that particular dynamic. And one tidbit I always like to share is just biologically, it takes us about 20 minutes, our brains 20 minutes to register fullness. So that's probably where you hear that concept of chew your food several times, right? Because it's when you're eating very quickly, you might be eating so fast that your brain hasn't had time to kind of catch up and understand that you're actually full. You feel fine. You're satiated, right? So there's different types of eaters. 3. There's fast eaters, there's moderate eaters, and there's slow eaters. So I want you all to just kind of think about for a minute where you fall in that spectrum. Maybe you're a little bit of both, and we'll talk a little bit about this. I tend to be a fast eater, and I think a lot of people are probably similar. But these are the folks who just eat in a hurry. They're like, I just got to eat something, and I got to eat it now. And they eat in a hurry. They eat on the run. Maybe they eat standing. I did that for many years when I worked in restaurants, and it just became habit. Maybe it is something that's habit because culturally that's what you grew up with. Maybe somebody modeled that behavior and you just kind of continue to do it without thinking about it. But when you're a fast eater, you're not really eating for the enjoyment of it. You're just eating, right? You're not really thinking about it. You're not thinking about what you're putting in. You're just doing it. Moderate eaters are kind of in the middle, obviously. So they're maybe a combination of both, and kind of depending on the circumstance, they might be a fast eater at one point, or they might be a slow eater, or kind of somewhere in between. Slow eaters are some of my favorite people, and this, I believe, is something that takes practice, takes awareness and consciousness, and this is what we want to strive for, because one, they really are interested in the food that they're eating, and they have a deeper connection with the food and a deeper connection with the experience. Now, can we do this all the time? Maybe not, but can we do it sometimes and see what that feels like, so that maybe when we have the availability, we can do it more often? Yes, I do believe. So our goal is to really do that, because one, it helps us just literally digest our food and metabolize that food more efficiently. And then two, we just have such a deeper connection with our food and that experience. And when you have an experience like that, and you think about your regular day-to-day experience with food, the light bulb goes off. And if you are able to sort of experience both of them, I want you to try to incorporate the one that where you have more of the connection. Because as I was saying, when you're able to just give your body a chance to digest things at a slower pace, you may not suffer from things like the bloating, the acid reflux, just the kind of stomachache acheness when you eat so quickly. Have you all ever had the experience where you're like, I ate that so fast my stomach hurts, or I ate that so fast I feel like I need a nap? I have a friend who often says, I ate so much I feel like I just had like a gut bomb, because they just feel the food just kind of in their center, in their core. And if you remember, like, our center and our core is a lot of like how we operate and function in the day. Like this is how we ground in the day. And if any of that is ever off, then we're off, right? I've been talking a lot in some of my other classes about like keeping our gut healthy, and obviously we do have some great ingredients today to help with that, like our anti-inflammatory foods, the ginger, the garlic. But when we're off like that, one simple quick thing that we can do is just to slow down with our eating. It helps break down the food a little bit better. Things aren't, if you think about it just logically, like we're not shoving things down and giving ourselves, our bodies, our systems a chance to just really digest that through in the full process in a slow, natural way. This is oftentimes why I think people speak highly of things like intermittent fasting, because it really helps the body reset to a pace that feels comfortable and more natural. But truly, it's helping you to absorb the nutrients from the food in a much more natural way. It's helping the body to just really fully digest everything, so that, yes, you're having a pleasurable experience with that food, but your body is thanking you, because you're like, everything is low stress. And if you remember from last week when we were talking about the nervous system, that rest and digest state, the parasympathetic nervous system state, that's really what we want. So these stressors that we were talking about, all that stuff that happens, that's triggering us. When we have that happen, it may be a stress thing that's, something that's happening outside of your body, but it's affecting you physically as well. And when you have any kind of stress like that, that's also affecting your physiology. Sharon?
Yeah, I had an experience like eating and bending down. So like just being used to being a mom with two children, right? Quick, did this, did that. Now they're older, but I still have that behavior, that bad habit of, okay, I'm gonna get my breakfast ready. Oh wait, let me get this, bend down, take care of this, and then all of a sudden I started to notice this acid, like heartburn. I'm like, what? And so now I realize I stopped doing that, and it stopped. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just trying to do too many things.
Yes. Yes, I hear.
I was saying I was an educator for almost 40 years, and you only have so much time to eat your lunch. And I still find myself mimicking scarfing my food down in that short period of time. And it's like I've had to slow down for my mental well-being, but it's inherent.
It is.
It's in there that you've just been, for that many years, you just eat so fast.
Exactly. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying. Like sometimes it becomes something that's part of, your environment, your culture, what you've been exposed to, and it's not anything bad, but it's something that does require some practice and intentional like awareness so that we can say, okay, maybe today I have a little bit more time. This is how I'm going to sit down and enjoy my meal, because we all deserve that. You know, we take care of so many people, we take care of others, but we really need to kind of think about taking care of ourselves in the way that we interact with our food. So your exercise for today is going to be taking a pleasure inventory. And you can write it on the back of here or just think about it. But basically it's an exercise where I want us to think about how we understand our eating patterns and how we incorporate different things, whether they're positive and pleasurable experiences in our life, and separate from how we interact with food to get kind of that same sensation, right? So take a minute and I'll kind of give some examples here. So the first one is maybe it's quiet solitude that you really enjoy, or just having some alone time to just kind of recenter, ground. Or maybe your thing is like you get your energy and your pleasure from being around other people or being in groups or getting together with friends. The next one is being outdoors or being in nature. I was teaching a class of youth and a lot of them kept saying something with water, which I love. So being near water, maybe camping, but something that's outdoors versus something that's more indoors. Maybe, Texas is hot. Some people don't want to leave their house, and I get it. But maybe you like to, play games. You invite people over, listen to music, or practice a favorite hobby. And then the last one is, just to kind of throw this out there because it's almost summer, exploring your own backyard. So kind of staying close to home and doing maybe some day trips, or just even going out in your neighborhood and, exploring, or traveling, going abroad, visiting a different state, just like really getting out there and having an adventure. So some food for thought. Think about if any of these particular examples resonate with you. But then think about in your day-to-day or your regular routine, are there other experiences that you find or you make time for that bring you pleasure? And then how often are you enjoying those? How often are you making time to enjoy those? Or what's preventing you from incorporating more of those experiences into your life today? And so no stress, because again, we don't want to stress anybody out, but the purpose of this activity is to really get us, again, to think about sort of being more present and bringing more pleasure into our lives in so many other categories and not just with the food, right? Because all of these things can be done with food involved, and I think that's wonderful. But we're trying to sort of distinguish what's causing us to develop the certain habits that we have or certain relationships that we have with the food. And really slowing down to think about that and all of the things that are happening in the background. So if we find other areas where we are getting kind of the same, as they say, sort of the same hit or the same experience, that feeling, then we have a multitude of ways that we can kind of deal with our stress. Maybe it is, getting something quickly to eat, but maybe it's eating it at a park, right? So we're now expanding that experience. We have a few minutes in between having to rush to the next thing, and we find this cool park, and we can sit there and enjoy our Chick-fil-A, right? This is what I want you all to kind of start to expand to think about. This is kind of where we're headed. Any questions about our homework or the lesson for today before I show you this beautiful Chana Masala and dish some stuff out here? Okay, all right, well, this is definitely thickened. If we let it go a little bit longer, it will get even more stew-like, but this is pretty good. So I'm just going to quickly add a little more squeeze of lemon just to kind of add that nice bright flavor at the end. There was only a half a teaspoon of salt in this. I'm going to add just a little bit to round out the flavor here. Inch. And then I want to garnish it with a little more fresh cilantro. And we're going to pass out some that we have that's heated. Now the one that we have that we can start with is the one that is not, doesn't have the jalapenos. But I made that last night, so it's had some time to develop flavors. This one, obviously, once it comes together and it has time to sit, will taste similar, but maybe with a little more heat because it has that jalapeno in there. And I'm just going to taste this because, as every good chef does, we want to make sure.
I missed. Did you say white, some salt earlier and then some later? What happens when you do the salt at the end?
The salt at the end is just now kind of rounding out the flavors. There was just a little bit which went into our paste, if you remember. This is, I mean, if you all are concerned about salt as well, this is not very salty. And I tend to cook when I'm cooking, especially for others, with a little bit of salt, and then people can add what they want. It's harder to take the salt out, right? There is a little bit of salt naturally in those canned tomatoes. So I'm gonna leave it as is because I think it's delicious. It's spicy though, because it's got that whole jalapeno. So if anybody here would like to try this version with the heat, I will serve up some of that. But I thank you all for being here today, and thank you all for enjoying this class and being so open to sharing. And I look forward to our next class next week. Thank you. All right, thank you.